Hey there Dev Squad, Virtus here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at how in-game currencies are developed for video games. We'll cover what an in-game currency is, the logic powering them, and how you can actually develop these in-game currencies using Unreal Engine 4, going through the entire process step by step. Many popular games use in-game currencies to allow the player to purchase items in a store or upgrade their player. These in-game currencies could be anything from coins, credits, V-Bucks, shards, gems, anything like that. And you can find these in-game currencies in popular video games such as Fortnite, Black Ops, PUBG, and more. Some games take this one step further, and they actually allow you to purchase this in-game currency using real money, and this is something called microtransactions. Now, this isn't going to be something that we're going to be teaching you in today's video, but if this is something that you want to look into and you want to learn how to develop in Unreal Engine 4, let me know in the comments down below. So how do in-game currencies actually work? So essentially they are just data, and when I say data I mean variables. We have a variety of different variable types available to us, however being an in-game currency is going to be displayed in a numerical form, a number. That is the type of variable that we're going to be using. So having said that, generally when you're working with an in-game currency you are going to be doing this as an integer or as a float. And all of this information is just going to be stored within that variable, because a variable at the end of the day is just memory, and it's going to allow you to store that information. When a player makes a purchase from the store, we are going to be using some simple maths functions inside of the game engine to edit that variable. So, having said that, if they were to purchase an item from a store that costs 650 credits, what you'd be doing is a couple of things. First and foremost, you are going to be using some conditions to check to see A, whether or not they actually have enough credits, and if they do, this is where we're then going to be moving on to actually doing the math. So you're going to take the current value and then you're just going to reduce it by the cost of that item. So that is the very basics of how in-game currencies work. What we're going to do now is take a moment to actually take that information, take it into Unreal Engine 4 and start developing our own in-game currencies. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into Unreal Engine 4. So now that we're inside of Unreal Engine 4, we can move on to how we can actually use variables to power our currencies for our game. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is that you can apply this terminology and this knowledge to any game project that you're working on, whether that be an FPS project, an RPG project, or just something that you're doing already. Now, for the purpose of this video, I have just created a blank project. So having said that, you can take all of this stuff that we're creating in today's video and just apply it to a project that you have already. So let's go ahead and introduce you to variables. Go to Blueprints and then open up your third-person character. So once we're in here, what we're going to be doing is moving on to showing you how to create a variable and how to do some of the common functions that you are going to need to know about for creating an in-game currency. Now, creating a variable is really simple. Go to the bottom left-hand corner and then just press Add Variable. From here, we're going to give this the name Game Currency. And then in the top right hand corner underneath the details panel, we are going to be setting the variable type to integer. Now, the reason why we're using an integer, like I said before, is because it is a numerical value that we are looking for. You could also use a float variable if that's something that you want to do, and the difference between a float and an integer is a float is going to allow you to have decimal places. So if you want to have decimal places in your currency, then you are going to want to use floats. However, if you want a currency where it's simply just whole values, then you are going to want to work with integers. So go ahead and set this to an integer. And then once you've done this, hit compile, and then down at the bottom you are then going to be able to set your default value. Now your default value is going to be the value that this currency is going to be at default. So if you want to start off your player with X amount of coins, this is where you're going to be defining it. So if you wanted to start the character off with 100 coins, you would be putting in 100 coins on here. If you want him to start off with nothing, you would set this to 0. So now that we've actually got our variable which is going to store the data for our game currency, what I'm going to do is move on to showing you how you can set this to change the value for common functions you're going to want to do with your currency. So the first thing that you might want to do is get a reference to your game currency which you might want to do as part of your blueprint code. If you want to get a reference to it, all you've got to do is select it, drag and drop into the scene, and then just choose get, and this is going to get a reference to that game currency. So let's say you wanted to change the game currency. The way you'd be doing this is by using the set node. To get that set node, all you gotta do, once again, drag and drop, but this time hit set. In addition to that, you can also just right click and type in set game currency. And then with this, what you're going to be able to do is you can do integer plus integer, or you can do integer minus integer, and this is going to allow you to change the value of that game currency. So let's say a player is trying to make a purchase and they've purchased that item. Once they've purchased that item, you are going to be getting the current value and taking another value away from that. So what you might want to do is get a reference to the original value, hook this up into your A, and then your B is going to be the purchase price. And that is how this works. Or let's say that your player is picking up some of this currency, you want to give it the currency. What you're going to do is set this, and you are simply going to do integer plus integer. And then with this, A, once again, is going to be your original value, you're getting a reference to that, and then with B, what you're doing with this is simply defining how much you want to add onto this currency. So if you want to give them 25 of this currency, whatever it is, just put 25 into there. Now bear in mind, you will need to have an event to hook up into this to actually fire off the event. And that could be anything from begin play, colliding with an object, picking up an object, and if you want to learn about that kind of stuff, about how you can create these various events, then I definitely advise that you go ahead and check out my Blueprint tutorial series. What we will be doing, however, in today's video is giving you the basic knowledge to have you set up that game currency. So the next thing that you might want to do with your variable for your game currency is use the branch node. This branch node is essentially going to allow you to use conditions. So you can get a reference to the currency and check to see whether or not it's greater than a certain amount, less than a certain amount, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is show you exactly what I'm talking about. So with your game currency, get a reference to it. And then what we're going to do is right click in here, go to branch, and then with this branch we have our condition. And inside of here, if we type in integer, we have all of these different integer conditions. So we've got greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, or just less than and greater than, and we can use this to power our currency system. And this is something that we're going to be showing you later on the video as we all bring this into life. So we've got all of these conditions available to you. So what I'm going to do now is show you how you can actually use one. So what we're going to do is do integer greater than. So this is something that you might want to do if you want to check to see if the player has enough coins to make this purchase. What you would do is check to see if A is greater than B. A being your game currency and B being the purchase price. And it is simple as that. So now that we know how to use variables and how to use them to power our in-game currency, what we're going to be doing is moving on to the next step, which is actually displaying your currency on the screen and integrating it into buttons. So for us to be able to display our currency on the screen, we are going to need to have a widget blueprint. A widget blueprint essentially allows us to put together graphical elements and display them on the screen, and also tie blueprints to those. If you want to create one, it's really simple. Go into your content browser, right click, go all the way down to the bottom, user interface, and create a widget blueprint. From here, what we can do is give this the name. We're going to give this the name HUD. HUD being for heads up display. This is going to be a little counter which is going to show in the top left hand corner how much of this currency we have got. So we're going to open this up. Once we're inside of here, what we're going to be doing is adding in a little piece of text at the top left like I said. And with this, we can set the styling for this currency for the text. What I'm going to be doing for this video is simply going to the details, appearance, and I'm going to set my color and opacity to a black to make it nice and easy to read. You can also change things like the font, the shadow offset, and the color. In addition to this, you can also add other interactive elements onto your heads-up display, such as an image for the currency itself. You can use sliders, progress bars, and all of that good stuff. If you want to learn a little bit more about user interfaces and how you can develop them inside of Unreal Engine 4, I advise you check out my user interface series for that. But for now, what we're going to be doing is showing you how you can link this text to the number for your game currency, so linking it to the variable. The way that we're going to do this is by using something called a content binding. This binding is essentially going to dynamically update that text, putting in the information of the variable. So to create that, we are going to go to our details, go to content, and then where we've got our text, we are going to be clicking bind and then create binding. And what we can do is link this to that variable. The way that we're going to do this is by dragging out from the execution pin, and we are going to cast to the third person character. Now the reason why I'm casting to the third person character is because that is where the variable is stored. And then as the third person character, this is where I'm going to be getting a reference to that game currency, just like we did before. And then with our game currency, we are simply going to hook this up to our return value. And by hooking this up to our return value, it is going to be displaying this reference of the variable onto our binding, which is going to display it on the screen. As part of the conversion, you have some settings. The main one we're going to play with is minimum integral digits, and this is just going to determine how many integral digits are going to be on the screen at any one time. The minimum is going to be 2, the maximum can be as high as you like. The reason why I'm using 2 is so it's always going to be 2 digits. Now the last thing we need to do for this to work is set our object wildcard to get player character so it can make that successful cast. So if we go ahead and hit compile now, we can close this. We've got our widget, it's going to link it to our game currency, but at the moment we haven't told the game to display this widget onto the screen. The way we're going to do this is by simply going into the character, and then we're going to simply do begin play, and from begin play we are going to be creating a widget. This widget is going to be heads up display. So this create widget is essentially going to load that widget blueprint onto the memory, and once we've done that, what we can do is simply add this to the viewport. And now if I go ahead and hit compile and then hit play, in the top left hand corner you are going to notice we have got some simple text, and that text is going to be linked to the variable that we created, so it's just displaying 0. So now that we've got all of this set up, what we can do now is move on to the next step, which is actually saving that information for our game currency. So if the player closes the game and opens it again, they're still going to have that currency. What we're also going to be doing once we've done this is setting up a button to purchase an item or simulate purchasing an item, and we're also going to set up a button for adding the currency, so picking up the currency, so you will be able to see the logic of how all of this is going to be done, and then from there you can link it into your gameplay. So without further ado, let's move on to the save game information. So, using save game data inside of Unreal Engine is a really nice feature, as it's going to allow you to have persistent storage. Now, the trouble that you're going to have with the variable inside of your third-person character is if the player closes the game and opens it up again, that variable is going to return to the default, which is 0. So if you want that progress to save, you have got to implement save game data. To do this, what we're going to be doing is creating a save game data blueprint. To do that, in your content browser, right click and then add a new blueprint class. And then go to all classes, expand that, and then you are looking for save game. And go ahead and select this to create it. Once we've got this, we can give this the name. Now, being the fact that this is going to be player related save game information, we are going to give this the name player save game info. So now we've got this save game info, what we can do is open this up. And just like before, we are going to be creating a variable inside of here. So we've got one variable inside of the third person character that is going to be temporary, but this one inside of the save game, this is going to be permanent and persistent, and we're going to be using this in just the same way. So you want to go to variables, add a variable, and we are going to be giving this the same name, which is simply game currency. Once again, we're working with numerical data, so we are looking for the variable type integer. And then hit compile, and from there you can change your default value. Once again, if you want the player to have 0 of this currency by default, set this to 0. If you want them to start the game with 100 by default, set this to 100. But for now, 0 is where I'm happy. So that is all you actually need to do within this blueprint. This is essentially just acting as storage. So what we're going to do is go ahead and close this. So what we need to do now is actually set up our gameplay systems to reference that storage, and this is where the hard part is going to come in. So what we're going to do now is set up a system whereby when the player first loads into the game, it is going to check to see if save game data exists already. If it does, then what it's going to be doing is setting the temporary variable for the game currency equal to the saved one. And that way, whatever you have saved is essentially going to be displayed on the screen. And if there isn't save game data already, then it's going to create a save game data using this blueprint. So what we're going to do is open up our third person character, and we're going to do just that. Now, with our begin play, we are going to bring this down to make us a little bit of space to write some code. Now with this first bit selected, I am going to press C to comment this, and by commenting on this I can just remind myself this first section here is for loading the heads up display. So I'm going to give this the name load HUD, just like that. So now that's done, what we're going to do is use the save game nodes that we have available to us. The first one is does save game exist? And what this is going to do is check to see whether or not save game data has already been created with this slot name. The slot name is going to be game currency data. Now, when you're working with slot names for save game data, I advise that you do not use capitals and make sure it's very easy to type in, because if you create blueprints later on, which you will do using this slot name, if that slot name is not correct, it is not going to be able to reference it, and it is not going to save or load your information. Now with this node, does save game exist, what we have access to is a return value. And this return value we can hook up into a branch node to use as the condition. So now, essentially, we can ask, does the save game data exist already? Yes or no? And if it does, then we're going to tell it to load that information. If it doesn't exist, we are going to be telling it to create that save game data. So let's start off with loading the data. So on true, what we're going to be doing is loading game from slot. And this is going to load the save game information from the slot. Now the slot name, you want to make sure this is the same as this, as it's the same slot you're working with. And once you've done this, what we can do from here is it's loaded the information. We can then promote this to a variable that we can use as an intermediary. And what we're going to do is give this the name saver sub class. And essentially this is just an object for that save game information, which we're going to be needing to use to reference later on in our code. So we've got this, and what we're going to be doing now is simply casting to that save game information so we can access the variable directly. So we're going to be casting to the player save game info. And then the object for this, you can probably guess, is going to be what we've just loaded from the slot. So you want to hook this up in here. Now what we're going to be doing from here is simply as player save game info, we are going to be getting a reference to the game currency. And with this game currency, we're going to be taking this information and feeding it into the variable that we've got here. So having said that, what we're going to do is take our variable within our third person character for game currency, and we are going to set this. And with this, what we're going to do is simply hook up this reference just like that. So it's going to take the information from the save game and replace the information that's in our temporary storage at the moment. Once it's done this, what we're going to do just for debugging purposes is we are simply going to print a string, and for our string it is simply going to say loaded information. And that is it. So what this is going to do is take the information from the save game for that currency and feed it into our temporary storage. So what we need to do now is set up our code for creating save game data if they haven't previously loaded this game. So what we're going to be doing is creating save game object, and then the save game class is going to be player save game info, as this is the one which contains our variables. For the return value, what we're going to be doing is dragging this out, and we are going to be setting our saver subclass. So this is going to be creating the object and then feeding it into this variable for us to use. Once we've done this, what we're going to be doing is casting to our player save game data, player save game info. The object wildcard is going to be the saver subclass, as that's what you're referencing essentially. And then with this, what we're going to be doing is pretty straightforward. We are simply going to be setting our currency equal to 0. And then with this, what we're going to do from here is we are going to save the game to slot. And then the object is going to be your saver subclass. Your slot name is going to be what we've been using previously. So we're going to save it to that slot, making sure the slot name is the same so that we can then later on reference that to load it. So once it's saved, we're going to be using the return value, and we are simply going to be printing this to a string so we can tell whether or not it saved this information. So what we're going to do is say created and saved information. So let's go ahead and compile and test this. So because this is the first time we've run this code, what it should do is create and save that information. And then every other time after that, it should be loading the information. And we're going to be able to see this from the print strings in the top left. So close this, hit play, and notice in the top left hand corner, it did say created and saved information. Go ahead and hit play, and this time you will notice it will say loaded information. So what we have now is a simple system where it's going to take our currency data and load it from the save game. So now that we know that works, we can move on to the fun bit, which is showing you how to set up the logic for a purchase using your in-game currency, and also how you can set up the logic to give you more of that currency. So let's say the player levels up, then you're going to want to give it that currency. We're going to be showing you how you can do just that. So the first thing that we're going to do is open up our heads up display. Inside of here, we are going to be creating a button that is going to give the player currency when they press it. So what we're going to do is with this button, now bear in mind this button is just acting as an event. You can hook this up to any event. It doesn't have to be a button, it could be a player leveling up, it could be killing an enemy or anything like that. But for now we're going to be using the button as the event. And the specific button event we're going to be using is onClicked. So go ahead and create one of these. So what we're going to be doing from here is we are going to be casting to the third person character, as the third person character has the temporary storage and it also allows us to access the subclass, which is going to give us access to the permanent storage as well. So cast to third person character, the object wildcard is going to be get player character. So after that we've cast to our third person character, what we're going to be doing is casting to our player save game data. And the reason for this is because I want to be able to change that variable that we've got for our game currency. So cast to player save game info, we need an object. Now that object is the subclass. We have a reference to that in our third person character. So as third person character, we can get our saver subclass and hook this straight up to our object. And now as our player save game info, what we can do is take the existing information and add a value to it, because that's what we want our button to do. So every time you press it, we are going to get +1 of that currency. The way we're going to do this is by using the Increment Integer node. So we're going to do Increment Integer. Now what you could do is integer plus integer, however because we're just adding 1 we can use this, and as you read it, it says add 1 to the specified value and then set it. So we're going to hook this up to the execution pin, and then the value that we're putting in here is going to be our game currency, and we're going to be getting this from the player save game data. So hook this up in here. So that is our permanent storage changed. What we also need to do is change our temporary storage. So we are going to do increment integer again. So I've just selected it and then press Ctrl C and then Ctrl V to paste this. And then the value for this, as third person character, you want to get a reference to your game currency. So now that we have these numbers actually going up, what we need to do now is save this to the slot, so when you close the game and open it up again, the information is going to be the same. So what we're going to do is simply drag out and then save the game to the slot. The save game object is going to be our saver subclass. So if you want to, you can get another reference to this to make it cleaner, or you could just drag it in straight away like that. Our slot name, you need to make sure that is exactly the same as it is in your third person character blueprint, because if the name is different, it is not going to be able to reference it. So just go into there, copy it, and then just paste it in to make sure it is perfectly good. And then once we've done this, what we're going to do is from the return value, we are simply going to print a string. This return value is just going to tell us whether or not we have successfully saved this information for the game currency. So with this print string, we are going to go to inString and we're going to set this to increased and saved. And what that should be there, now it's good to go. If we go ahead and hit compile, hit play, we can test this. So at the moment, you can see that we have only got 0 coins. If I was to press this button, every time I press it, it's going to say increased and saved. And you'll also notice that number in the top left there is going to increase by 1 every time I press it. If I close the game and open it up again, you are going to notice that our variable is still set to 10. So we now have a persistently stored game currency set up for our game. So now that you know how to work with your variables, and you know how to work with your save game data, there is only one last thing that I wanted to show you. That one last thing is how you would set up the logic to make a game purchase using this save game data. And that's simply going to be checking to see whether or not they've got enough coins, and if they do have enough coins, then take away from that value. If they don't, then we're not going to do anything, we're not changing the information at all. For that, what we're going to need is inside of our heads up display is a second button. To make this easier, what I'm going to be doing is adding in a piece of text next to each of these buttons telling us what they do. So we've got two text blocks. The first one is going to say give coins, and then the second one is going to be purchase. And then once we've got this, we can actually work on this functionality for this second button. To do that, you want to go ahead and create an onClicked event, and from here we can start to simulate a purchase using Savegame data. So what we're going to be doing is casting to the third person character. The object wildcard is going to be getPlayerCharacter, and the reason why I'm referencing this character is because we need to see whether or not they've got enough coins. That coin variable is stored inside of the third person character. So what we're going to do is get the game currency, and then with this we are going to create a branch, and then with this branch we are just going to check to see whether or not an integer is greater than or equal to. This second value is going to be the purchase price. So A is going to be the current amount of coins, because this is what we check and see if it is greater than that, and then B is going to be our purchase price. So let's say we wanted to purchase something that is 25 coins, you would put 25 into here. If they do have enough, then what we're going to be doing is doing all of our functionality for changing the save game information, but if they don't have enough coins, all we're going to be doing is printing a string saying you have not got enough coins. So go ahead and do that. Not enough coins. And we're going to move this down and make some space. From true, what we're going to be doing is casting to our player save game info. The object is going to be coming from the third person character, so get that saver subclass, get a reference to it from cast to third person character, and hook this up to your object. And then as player save game object, what we're going to be doing is simply setting our currency to a new value. So set game currency, and with this all we're going to do is simply integer minus integer, because we're getting the current value and then taking away the purchase price from it, which is going to be 25. And then your A is going to be the original value. So you can get this original value from the save game data in our cast node. So get game currency, and then all you're doing is taking away 25 from it. What you're also going to want to do to make sure that your permanent and your temporary storage is the same is do the same thing with our temporary value. So as third person character, we are going to set game currency, and then with this game currency we are going to simply do just the same, integer minus integer, and we are going to get the original reference from the third person character, which is game currency, hook this into our A, and then we are going to be taking away the purchase price, which is 25. Once that's done, what we're going to be doing is simply saving this new information to that slot. So save game to slot, with the slot name, just copy it from one of your other blueprints, paste it in here, and then our save game object is going to be this subclass that we've got from our third person character. And then lastly, we are going to be printing this to a string to check to see whether or not the purchase has been made and saved. So what we're going to do is say purchased and saved. So hopefully all of this has given you a better understanding of the different logic that you are going to need to take advantage of inside of blueprints to create your in-game currency. If I go ahead and press play, we now have a function to give us coins and also to purchase an item. So at the minute we've got 10 coins. I can keep giving us more coins, I can press it as many times as I want, and as you can see here, I've now got 23. That is not enough to purchase an item, so if I go ahead and try and purchase, it's going to say not enough coins. If I hit play, by closing that and then opening it, we've still got those coins, give us a couple more, and I can then purchase that item. So that is absolutely everything that you need to know about in-game currencies and how you can create them with save data inside of Unreal Engine 4. There is still a lot more that you need to do to implement this into your game, such as actually giving you items and all of that good stuff, but that's going to be very specific to your project. I hope you have enjoyed this new style video and this tutorial. Go ahead and play around and implement it into your project, but for now guys, as usual, stay awesome, keep creating, your boy Virtus, signing out. This video was made possible by my supporters on Patreon. If you want more videos like this, check out my Patreon page using the link in the description. To stay up to date on new releases, make sure you follow us on social media.